Outer Limits podcast, and you are listening to episode
4
of our series Fuller Understanding, as we go through the filmography of Samuel Fuller in chronological order. I am your host, Craig, and I'm joined by my co-host, Robert Beams. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Craig. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very, very good. A little bit tired, it has to be said. Start of the new academic year brings a lot of work my way, but let's not get into that right now.
So
we're going to be. Oh, sorry.
Today we're looking at the 1951 film Fixed Bayonets, which, as I understand, I mean, you're the context man on this pod. You're the one who's done the reading. But my understanding is this is his first studio film, right? This is for Fox, not for Mr. Lippert and his band of carnies.
No, that's quite right. This is so after the commercial and critical success of Steel Helmet, some of the studios kind of came sniffing round, and he had some various interests basically in procuring his services from all the major studios. And the one that he went with was Fox, and he ended up making 4 films with Fox. Just checking I got my details right here. So this is the first, Fixed Bayonets. Then he makes Pick Up on South Street, Hell and High Water, and House of Bamboo. So this is over a sort of 4-year period. He makes 4 films for Fox. His budgets go up, obviously. So this is, I think it's $600,000, which is a considerable increase. I think the Steel Helmet was less for 100, I believe, made for less than 100, I believe.
Was this last time around? We talked a little bit about the nebulous world of A pictures and B pictures and all of this. I mean, to me, looking at this, not to put my opinion out there right up front, but it looked very cheap and very set bound. And I'm wondering, was this a B picture, or did people go to see this as the main film?
Well, in Dabrowski, I always forget her name. I apologize to her, even though she'll more than likely never see this podcast. In Dombrowski, yeah, I got it right. In her book, she talks about this is a time when obviously box office returns are starting to diminish slightly, and studios are getting sort of less hung up on the A/B designations for films. They're starting to trying to put out, trying to distinguish themselves really, and they don't want. They're less keen to sort of take a risk on the B pictures for some reason. You would have thought it'd be the other way around, but yeah. So this, what does it say? Production cutbacks that began in early 40s accelerated into the 50s. So, things are the writing's on the wall for the AB system at this point, a little bit. She also goes on to say that, this is more, that's a little bit later. I apologize. My context man role is not doing is being somewhat dropped here.
So can you give a summary of what this film's about? It's as we say, it's a Korean War following off from making another Korean War film, and the Korean War is still very much raging at this point, isn't it?
So it's got a great premise. So there is like large platoon, squadron, whatever the correct term is for 1,500 men that have been sort of camped out in this point of at this place, this kind of slightly rocky, mountainous place, and they get word that the Korean forces are advancing. The North Korean forces are advancing towards them, and they come up with a plan to sort of get out behind them. But in order to do that, they need to leave about 50 men behind to sort of put up a show, a rearguard action, to make it seem like the forces are behind them. And these 50 men have got to hold out for a couple of days to give the rest give the rest of the platoon chance to get away to safety, basically. So they hole up in this. It's kind of like a Thermopylae kind of thing, isn't it? There's like this narrow pass that they kind of up and they mine, and then they kind of take to the rocks and the foothills around it, setting up positions, and eventually. During some of the fighting, this cave opens up, and a lot of it moves into this icy cave as they kind of use the cave for shelter.
Trying to hold
out, trying to hold out until they can.
So they can break away as well and meet up with their group. So we get Gene Evans again, who we first met in the Steel Helmet as the protagonist there. He's the sort of, again, a kind of a grizzled, slightly over it officer, isn't he?
Very much so. He's kind of, I mean, it's not a stretch to say there's very little difference between his character in this and his character in Steel Helmet, really.
It's got that kind of world weariness, war weariness sort of thing going on, isn't he? And then you get this assortment of characters like you'd expect to find in a screwball comedy, where there's like the very Italian man and things like that. Who feel a bit out of place to me. I mean, the Steel Helmet had a bit of that, but it was a little bit, because the Steel Helmet makes and I think we've talked about Fuller being, if not progressive in the modern sense, at least kind of quite open-minded, progressive for his time. And you see that in Steel Helmet, where there's a real mix. Obviously, the whole film is about things like issues of race in America and things like that. And you get in that platoon, you get the kind of Japanese American and the African American, all these kind of things. You get a little bit of that here as well, don't you? You get this kind of mix, this melting pot of a kind of group that they're in.
Well, so I mean, part of the so basically what happens before the making of this film is that because it is very similar plot-wise to Steel Helmet, and obviously it's set in the same time. So as he signs this deal for Fox, he signs a deal which is kind of like a one for them, one for me kind of deal. So he has to work for Fox 26 weeks out of the year, and then he's free to do whatever he wants for the other 26. That includes, he doesn't have to sort of show his stories or his scripts to Fox. They don't get like first refusal or anything like that. It is that he does 26 weeks out of the year, he works for them and produces something for them.
Was this one for them?
This was one for them.
Okay.
And so, yeah, this is one for them. And not only that, but he's working within quite strict genre rules. So Zanuck has quite a lot of oversight over story and the kind of any more incendiary kind of elements of it. So in his autobiography,
sorry, Craig, you've frozen. You've broken up and frozen there. Last thing I heard you say was in his autobiography.
He talks about the Mccarran Internal Security Act. So it's a permanent kind of oversight or kind of kind of internal kind of spying mechanism over subversive activities, and this obviously links into the McCarthy Act as well.
We've lost you again. Some sort of connection issues.
What did you get last?
You said it tied into the McCarthy stuff, and I think you're freezing again. I don't know what the issues are.
I don't know. I've brilliant. Man talks about his Wi-Fi connection. It seems to have full bars.
Okay, I've got full bars as well. Let's go. Right. So it's similar to the McCarthy Act, or tied in with them.
So yeah, so Zanuck, as this being a Fox picture, being a big studio picture, they're very kind of concerned. Well, not concerned, but they worry about certain lines of dialogue. They worry about certain plot threads. They don't want to upset anybody. But
I noticed. I was just going to say, I noticed in the credits for this one, very prominently, it mentioned there being a U.S. Army advisor, and I thought, oh, hello,
we go.
Yeah. So sorry, carry on.
So there is a sort of back and forth really between there is a sort of back and forth really between what Sam Fuller wants to write and what Zanuck allows him to do. It's not like he doesn't talk about massive studio interference or anything like that, but it does seem to be a little bit of compromise in this one between what he'd really want to say with it, and he talks about edges being shaved down and things like that.
That's interesting to hear, because the thing is when you see this one in his only going by like letterboxd popularity, and you see how low down it is, considering that it's a bigger studio movie than Steel Helmet, that it's got a bigger budget, that it's, you know, on all of this, it kind of think, well, why has this one been forgotten? Why is this one the kind of so low down? And I think that it's interesting to hear you give that context, and I'm kind of relieved to hear that context because I thought that very much during this film, was that the edges were gone, the commentary was gone. And it's good to hear there's this one for me, one for you thing, because it means that the next one should be a lot better. But like with this one, I really felt like in Steel Helmet, you really had a lot of stuff in there that seemed fairly incendiary for the day, like things in there that would really kind of be on the line really for people, and kind of maybe piss off members of the audience on all sides of the kind of political spectrum. And what we get here instead seemed to me to be, and maybe there's subtext I'm missing, a much more straightforward patriotic film about army men, because you get this stuff at the beginning about how a general needs guns and all this kind of thing, whereas in Steel Helmet there was a lot of criticism of the higher ups and them kind of not necessarily knowing what they're doing, or being out of their depth in some ways. In this, it felt a lot more like we were supposed to. I can see from your face you disagree, so I want to hear.
Well, no, I think it's much more subtle than that. I think that I think there is still some subversion going on, but I think if you were a John Wayne fan, you know, you could watch it with you could watch it and not pick up on it. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I mean,
I watched it and didn't pick up on it, so I'm looking forward to hearing.
Massive John Wayne fan. So there is this kind of. There's a couple of things that I thought you'd really like. There's some good map work at the start, and there is there's a ticking clock. So we've got this. So right at the start, you've got an officer who sort of fails to kill, basically, to kill somebody. He can't bring himself to kill anyone. And they talk about command and what it means to be in command, and they mention that there's 3 other people above him, and if all 3 of those go, then he's got to take command. And sure enough, over the course of they go down one by one, and it comes to this crucial moment with a tank where there's somebody kind of walking through a minefield followed by a tank, and if he can take out this really terrified looking Korean soldier who's kind of walking through the minefield as a canary down the mine, if he can shoot him and the tank keeps going, the tank's going to hit the mines, and then they can follow up with some bazooka rounds and take the tank out. And sure enough, he does shoot him. But there's a few things, I think, that kind of undercut the kind of gung-ho-ness. First of all, like this lieutenant, or whatever his rank is, who eventually kind of kills and is kind of sort of celebrated for it. I think right at the end, when you see them walking through the water towards the rest of to rejoin, you know, there's no real sense of victory in his face. He looks kind of battered, bruised, and kind of a little bit and kind of you know, a little bit kind of shocked, shell-shocked by what he's done. And also there's a lot of talk about why people stay in the army and things like that, and it's like, some people they're bored, some people they're lazy, some people just don't know what else to do, kind of thing. There's no valor or anything, I don't think, within what these guys are doing. And you know, death is still cheap, and it's bored, it's boring, it's dirty, it's grimy. People are laughing and joking, but there's no real gung-ho sense of heroism to it, I don't think.
There isn't, and it is careful to avoid that. Like, they do sort of talk about this rearguard action as being a kind of a dirty business that they've got to do rather than this great heroic exercise. But whereas the ending is very similar to the ending of Steel Helmet, watching these guys like just kind of walk and it kind of being fairly somber. But whereas in Steel Helmet, the implication is, and all this buffoonery and pointlessness is going to carry on and again, the vibe I got on this one, because their rearguard action does save 15,000 guys, it's more like, these brave boys have done it. You know, I don't mean there's triumphalism behind it, but because of the context of what they've done, it's like, yeah, they struggled through, and by God, with their grit, the US Army really did show that, you know, they made a sterner stuff. That's the vibe I got.
I would agree, like at a kind of a macro level, that's definitely there. But for the actual characters that you spend time with as they're wading through that ice cold water with the dead on their shoulders, you know, I think it's not shying away from the actual cost of it all. But then again, you're right. It is saying our brave boys are willing to pay that cost for the good of America.
Exactly. I want to go back to what you said, because you said you thought I'd like some of the stuff early on, and I did. Like in that first scene, I actually wrote "cool premise" was my note. Because it almost did feel like a kind of, like you've already alluded to with the maps and the ticking clocks, it did feel a bit like something from one of these Kurosawa films where they're there with the map and there's a really cool premise, like you say, where they're like, okay, we need 50 boys to stay behind and they're going to let these boys go this way. And, you know, and I thought, okay, great. This is cool. Like, we might possibly even going to have these guys kind of, I don't know, the squadron wear down and the days tick on, and this sort of, I never felt that sense of jeopardy. I never felt like there was more than 6 boys. You get told that there's like 48 men that are staying behind, and I feel like the whole film is shot in tight, cost-saving close-up of like 1 or 2 men at a time, or they're on a rubbish set with like a clearly painted background. I felt like it was very, to me, I know Steel Helmet, watching it again, is very obviously very cheap. I didn't feel like this was obviously more expensive than Steel Helmet.
I disagree. I think it still looks cheap, but there's definitely more money in the sets, and there's definitely more money
there's a tank
in the camera, and there's a crane. There's a really lovely shot coming out of the of the cave and sort of following somebody down, and then you've got 2 people on the side over here, you've got another person on the side over here. You know, there's movement, there is more money been put into camera and grip for definite. You're right, I think it is still kind of cheap. I don't know what average budgets were around about this time. It seems like something I should have found out.
I felt very much watching it that dialogue and acting haven't been the strong points in these Fuller films up to now, and they often get by on big ideas. You know, like Steel Helmet is a film where it's mostly interesting because, for one thing, I like a bottle movie, and it's this small group of characters in one place. And when they are talking, even though the dialogue is clunky as hell, they're talking very like big ideas about racism and America and the nature of, you know, the morality or whatever of being there or whatever it is. And there's stuff there that's kind of interesting to latch onto and definitely seems near to the knuckle for the time that it's produced. In this one, because a lot of those hard edges are shaved back, I'm just watching bad actors saying rubbish dialogue to each other, and the banter is shit, and the characters are like really like, hey, I'm an Italian man, and it's and so I found it really hard to latch onto anything in this film because I just didn't feel like it had any of what was good about Steel Helmet and all of the bad sides of everything I've seen from Fuller films so far.
I wouldn't say the dialogue is necessarily shit. I think it is, but not necessarily. To me, like, a lot of Sam Fuller's dialogue is like a Nick Cage performance. Like, it's so out there. You need somebody to deliver it right. Like, you know, you need to put the oomph into it, and it's very difficult to hit the sweet spot. Like, to put his dialogue across well, like, if you die, I'll kill you, or whatever. Yeah. You need to hit a real sweet spot to.
Can I tell you my favorite line? I've got my favorite line written down here. I ain't hanging around here to get chopped into Chinese rice balls and washed down with Russian tea. That's my favorite line.
Yeah, you know, well, so, you know, like I say, it depends on. It's all about hitting the sweet spot with delivery.
I also
Okay.
there's an action scene towards the end, because there are some bits where I liked his direction. So there's a bit where this guy is walking along like a minefield, trying not to step on a mine, and it's really tense. And then there's the bit you spoke about near the end where the guy actually shoots the guy, and there's the tension about, is he going to do it? And actually, just in search of things to say about this film, because I was fearing like I'm going to have nothing to say about this film at all, I actually read the Variety review from the time, just thinking, well, what did they say about it? And the contemporary review, just the only real thing it talked about, other than just literally describing what the film was talked about how much tension there was, that it was a suspenseful film and you didn't know what was going to happen. And I think that the two scenes like that I just mentioned, the minefield and the is he going to shoot the guy, Sam Fuller's really good at building up tension there. What he's rubbish at is shooting the actual action beats, because there's a bit where they're firing at the tank and or they're firing at people on other hills or whatever, that stuff's going on, and it's like, I don't know if he's covering for the low budget or something, but he's just like, if I just cut a lot very quickly, the audience won't notice that nothing is happening. There's a distinct bit where it's just going like close up noises, and it's just like, yeah, nothing. No, I don't know what's going on. I am not sure anything's going on.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There's just a lot of, you could argue it's about not. You could argue, if you wanted to be extra generous, you could say it's about the chaos of war and being completely disorientated by it. I'm not going to beat that drum too hard, but I will say that in his defense. What I would say, though, apart from those, I actually, another thing I know you're a fan of, I really thought there was a good sense of geography to the set. I know it's only small, but you've got, like when I talk about the crane shot, you've got the cave up here and this little thing that leads down here, and a ridge where people sit behind, and then you've got this really tiny little opening like that leads directly out into the minefield, and then behind the minefield you've got this kind of ridge off to this side as well, and then you've got another sort of lip over here where the other men are. So you've got this kind of sort of almost like a stage to it, where exactly this is where they are. They're behind here. You've got a minefield in place, and they've got a few little foxholes to come from, and then they can go off and retreat into their cave. And I like that about it. I like the kind of, I thought that in terms of the premise and whatnot, the geography of all that made sense, that there'd be people behind, and that they could mask over that space and make themselves bigger than they actually were in that space. And I like that.
I never got a sense of the grandness of any of it, because it's so set down and very small. Like if it was, this isn't even really a criticism of Fuller, because Kurosawa was working with a lot more control and bigger budgets. But because we talked about him in our previous podcast, and because the stuff with the maps and the ticking clocks, if this was Kurosawa, you would get a sense of this epic army force going across this bridge and kind of going out away. You'd get a sense of the size of this other force coming towards them.
You never really get a sense of the threat from the Korean army.
No,
you've never seen more than sort of 10, 20 soldiers at a time.
And that's the thing, is what the film ends up being a lot of the time is on a very obvious set, maybe 6 American dudes, and then it'll cut to like 4 Korean dudes walking around on a very obvious set that they're supposedly looking at, and then these 2 groups of very few dudes will like maybe exchange some shots or something. And I never got that sense. I think in order for this to really work as a premise, because it's a really cool premise, I think in order for this to really work, I would have liked those ticking clocks more. I would have liked that sense of, oh my God, they've got 24 hours more to hold out or whatever. And, oh, they had 48 men. How many men are left? Oh, Jones just died. There's 17 of us. Oh, and the size of who's coming. And, well, in order to make it look like there's more of us, we're really going to have to do X, Y, Z. But it just didn't feel like that. It just felt a bit boring.
I think you're right. I think the film's major failing is the actual, after setting up the premise, is actually after establishing the threat, is maintaining the threat. And the real sense of what these men are under. But would that have made it seem even more heroic, even more gung ho? Even more our boys sticking up to the. But I don't know. But it would have made a more entertaining film.
But yeah, it would have. And also, while war isn't heroism, and there's lots of things that need to be said about how wasteful and tragic sort of war is. Ultimately, if 48 guys do sort of get chosen for the shit job so that 15,000 people can survive, there is a sort of heroism in that. Like, that isn't something that in that story is ever going to be completely out of it. Even if those people don't want to be there, had no choice, hated it was a terrible time, it's still, there's still a heroism to that story. If you're like Grandad said, oh, I was one of 30 blokes and we were told we had to defend this pass so that everyone else could get out, you'd think, oh fuck, that was pretty heroic. So I almost think that there needs to be some element of that on the because I think it's one thing to sort of criticize the machinations that kind of make a war like the Korean War happen and all of the kind of the macro stuff going on. But on the very kind of small scale level, this is just a group of guys trying to defend another group of guys. And it's, I don't know, I don't think that's problematic to sort of, you don't obviously want to romanticize that. And I don't think he does, but I think there is a bit of a heroism to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think you're right. I don't think it kind of, there may be heroism, but there's certainly not glory to it.
Yeah, you're right there.
And it's like it's as far as the film goes, I think it's relatively unsung. It's not. These guys are going to go back to their lives, to back to their girlfriends, back to their bowling alleys, back to all the other things that they dream of. It's not. They're not. I mean, if you think about something like Flags of Our Fathers, where it's all about the publicity tour that those guys go on afterwards. There's no sense of that kind of jingoism afterwards, after the fact, even if there is a sense of, our boys look after our boys. It seems like the sort of film that might precede one of those 70s war veteran films. Was it Coming Home? Was one of do you know what I mean? Or this might be it might be a prequel to something along the lines of Born on the 4th of July, or that kind of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's got that kind of sense to it. I think there's not a glorification of it in any way at all.
What was because something I was interested in is, obviously we've talked previously about Fuller's war experiences. Does he relate any of that to what he depicts in this film? Is there much that you got that was from sort of his personal biography in the same way we've seen in some of his other films so far?
He doesn't talk about any specific instance, although he says that he's put them in. He talks about what he wanted was he wanted to talk about the thrill of war, and he calls it a tremendous thrill, and to him that's death. Like, the kind of the waiting and the anticipating, and then it not being you, or the possibility that you might go at any time, or that kind of thing. He talked about, I know you say being lost in those in those battle scenes and the close-ups. He describes as wanting to go for something intimate in those scenes and being up close with people. But I think you need to know or care about those characters to get that intimacy right. Like, this is perhaps an unfair example because it relies a lot on casting. You think about how intimate, and it's also 40 years later and on a much bigger budget. You think about how intimate the Normandy scenes are in Saving Private Ryan. That works there, not because you know the character yet, but because you know enough about the character through it being Tom Hanks. And I think if we'd got to know people a little bit better than these big stereotypes, then maybe that intimacy would have come across a little bit more. But yeah, he's got a few little stories here. There's some more stuff that I found about his politics and standing up for Dalton Trumbull in a bar. But just the main thing he says in his interview, is Eric Sherman and Martin Rubin interview, is he talks about a funny incident. This is, it kind of speaks to his personality a little bit, and about this kind of I don't know. I'll see what you think. One of our stuntmen was hurt. Nothing serious. He twisted his leg. I found out that when stuntmen are hurt and taken off a picture, their salary is stopped. So I got an idea. I told my assistant, use him as a casualty. Well, by the end of the week, I had a casualty list this long. Anyone who was hurt continued on the picture as a casualty, only they were real casualties. If a fella couldn't walk on the picture, he really couldn't walk.
That's strange because I'm looking. I've got the IMDb trivia page open. I don't know how that's sourced or how accurate it is. It says that this film was shot in 20 days. To have a long casualty list from this 20-day shoot kind of going in suggests a sort of a negligence.
Well, there's this sort of callous. There's kind of like this callous thoughtfulness to it. That's kind of like, well, he's going to get hurt. I want him to get paid, so just chuck him over there.
Yeah, I don't know how people were getting really hurt as well. Like, I don't want to undermine the great work that obviously stuntmen do, but like, what is in this film that would be like, what are the stunts?
A lot of uneven surfaces and explosions. I mean, there are a fair few explosions, and they must have been real, you know, at this time, and bits of set flying about. There's plenty of that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. You got me there.
So, yeah.
I was looking. I didn't notice him in the film, but you've probably seen as well from notes that James Dean. This was his first film appearance.
Yeah, I was looking out for him, but I didn't spot him.
Yeah, I had to sort of double check and then Google where he was in it, but he's actually more prominent in it than you think. I think he even has a little bit of dialogue, but he's uncredited, and I think it's his first ever appearance on film, which is probably the main piece of trivia I imagine to this film. I imagine the main audience for Fixed Bayonets in 2021 is probably like James Dean superfans who just want to see all of the films he was in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for people unlike us who've got you know, less time on their hands to go through a director's filmography film by film, you know, or even watch war films from the 1950s. This is a poor cousin to Steel Helmet, because they do share very similar themes and quite similar plots, in as much as you've got a small band of people trying to hold out in a single space and you know, provide cover or information for a larger part of the army. So, you know, there really isn't much reason to watch this one if Steel Helmet's an option, because it's just a vastly superior film.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. Do you have any other like notes on this one? Any other stories or production things to talk about?
I mean, there is some. I've got not a great deal. He doesn't really talk about it. I've got some other stuff that kind of dovetails nicely into the next film. So he originally wanted to make a film about Russia and shoot it in Russia, and that kind of scared Zanuck and went, mate, it's not going to happen. You know. And then you
got to have some gigantic stones on you during the McCarthy era to even suggest that, haven't you? Really?
Yeah, and I think, you know, after the experience with you know, going, well, we know he's got stones because the way he talked to the generals when he got called in, you know, there was a spotlight on him, or people were interested. And he says in his autobiography, people continued, this might be a bit of a lengthy quote, but people continued trying to pigeonhole me as a lefty or a righty, and my work being liberal or conservative, projecting their own notions on me. I wouldn't let them affect my deeply held belief system. Peace and ethics were my beacons. I wanted to transcend the narrow politics, terms, and emblems that imprison a creative person. McCarthyism had spawned a horrible climate of fear and suspicion. The blacklist, coercion, witch hunts, accusations, and self-imposed censorship were inadmissible in our democracy. It was execrable how artists felt compelled to label themselves as left or right. I was deeply hurt by what was happening in America so soon after putting my life on the line to fight the fascists in Europe. All the venom and general hysteria at home seemed to me just like more fascism. And he talks about some particularly reactionary people like George Sokolsky and the way that Edward G. Robinson was being treated, stuff like that. And he's got a nice little anecdote here as well. So another time I was at a well-known Hollywood hangout having a drink with Dalton Trumbull. A reactionary son of a bitch named Macaulay stood near us. He asked me after my reception for Stevenson, a presidential candidate, if he could use my house for some kind of right-wing political meeting. I refused. Macaulay started insulting Dalton at the bar, goading him into a fight. Despite my war experience, I don't consider myself a violent person, but don't push me, goddammit. This creep Macaulay really got me angry. Like a saloon scene from a Wayne Western, I picked up a whiskey bottle from the bar and waved it in front of the son of a bitch's face. Maybe the little coward's aggression towards Trumbo was actually meant for me. I told Macaulay I was going to shove the bottle down his throat if he didn't shut up. He shut up. So there we go. He talks about he goes on to talk about other little stories about a Directors Guild of American election where it was Cecil B. DeMille and one of the Mankiewicz, which one was it? Joe, up for the role and going to the debates, the presidential debates, and the room sort of going quiet when John Ford stands up and says, it goes, I make Westerns. My name's Jack Ford and I make Westerns, he began. We owe Cecil a lot. But I don't like Cecil's politics, Ford concluded. So I'm voting for Joe. The rest of you can do that. What the hell you want? So it does seem like a lot of these kind of, people who are kind of pigeonholed or kind of a lot of these films that seem to be stoking an idea of America are more idealistic than true reflections of what they actually see and what they understand America is at the time. It's people trying to show a vision of what they believe America stands for rather than the reality in front of them. And I think Fuller does that really well in Steel Helmet, and I think he tries to do a little bit of that in Fixed Bayonets. But ultimately, the kind of climate around the fact that he's got Zanuck producing, the fact that McCarthy's got his BDI all over everything, I think it's definitely edges shaved off with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that about sums her up, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, more or less.
That's more than I thought I had to say about Fixed Bayonets, so I'm pleasantly surprised. I saw you gave it. We often talk about our kind of our Letterboxd ratings as arbitrary and pointless as they are, but I saw you gave it a very, very respectable 3.5. I was going to give it sort of a 2.5 on the basis that I just found it unremarkable in every way, and then I thought it's got bad acting. Terrible sets, and I'm not really sure I like how most of it's directed, and I think the dialogue's bad, and I thought, well, yeah, it's actually much worse than that. So I'm intrigued because
I think
what did you give Steel Helmet?
4.5, I think.
Okay.
I think 3.5 was overly generous, and I'd go down to I'd probably go down to 2.5. I was thinking through what basically happened was, well, as I was watching it, there were a couple of things right at the end that I thought were really good. I thought that because the tank scene comes right near the end, and I really like the image of them in the water, coming out of the water with the bodies around them. So I think it's one of those things where it kind of left me on. It comes out at a good point, and sometimes when something comes out at a good point, you kind of forget what came before. So I think I was putting that in as the credits were rolling, and I felt much warmer to it than I have since. But I still don't think it's a 1.5. Like for me, a 1.5 is I don't know what would be a 1.5. Something Mission Impossible 2 or.
I'd probably go Mission Impossible 2 more than that. I think I would. If you ask me which I want to watch right now, I'd watch Mission Impossible 2 every day of the week over
Really?
again. Yeah, for sure.
Terrible.
Mission Impossible 2 has two people ride motorbikes at each other and then jump off and kind of spear each other midair. Nothing as good as that happens in this film. I'd also
it's also got Limp Bizkit though.
That's true. You're right. It's a 1.5. The other thing I would say about it is that out of the 4 of his films we've seen so far, this is the one that I would be the least inclined to rewatch ever again. Like I have much warmer feelings in retrospect to the Baron of Arizona than I do to this.
Well, that's another thing. Like it talks about. I mean, you know who's going to die and when, because it does stick so closely to the genre conventions, which I'm quite interested to see what happens. Because out of the next 4, I've seen 2 of them. I don't remember a great deal about them. I don't remember a great deal because it was a long time ago. Pick Up on South Street, but Hell and High Water is another war film, and then House of Bamboo. It says it's American noir, so I wonder how closely they're going to stick to the kind of genre, plot lines and whatnot.
My expectation is that the ones for him are going to be a bit more wild and have a bit more of an edge to them, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, well, the thing, he doesn't really take the opportunity to do the ones for him in any. I think what he does is spend a lot of the time writing. So our next film, next time round, is Park Row, and this is the one film in his filmography that is not just independently distributed, but he finances himself as well. It's a complete indie. And it is basically about the birth of the newspaper industry and his directly inspired by his experiences working in it. So it's this and The Big Red One are his 2 most personal films that are really about direct experience and his life with kind of semi-autobiographical elements to them. Big Red One more so, but there's some of it in Park Row as well.
I'm very excited about this. I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah. So this is his next one, and then he goes on and does his 3 for Fox, and I believe rather than making those other films in that time, he goes about getting some of the later scripts prepared and doing some more writing and whatnot.
Tell you what, Park Row's obviously more than a 1.5 right off the bat because it's 83 minutes long. You can't make an 83 minutes film less than 1.5 stars. Not possible.
Yeah. So that's where we'll say we will see you next time on Park Row.
Excellent. See you then.
Bye-bye.